Welcome back. It's day one of the special voting, which will last from today and tomorrow up until Wednesday, which will be the main day for the country's elections. And you now cross to the IEC's Results Operations Center, which is the nerve center for the processing of the country's election ballots. We cross to our reporter there, Ayanda Nyati, who is in conversation with our SABC News political editor, Mzwandile Mbeje. Very good morning to you, Ayanda. Over to you.
Yes, Mpiwe, it's the calm before the storm, as they say. There's an aerial shot of all that's happening and perhaps not happening just yet here at the Results Center in Midrand. And we know, of course, in a few days, perhaps even hours, this place, which is relatively still, is going to be overtaken by a hive of activity as political parties, observers, and many other stakeholders in this crucial election start to make their presence felt here as we start, quite frankly, the countdown to Wednesday. Of course, what's taking place at the moment is those special votes that you spoke about. We know, according to the IEC, that 1.6 million people have applied for a special vote, and presumably they've been granted that access. It's not a small number, especially when you consider the fact that each and every single vote will count in order for these parties to have some kind of slice of the pie, as they say, in this election. But the SABC's role is incredibly important, of course. We broadcast to millions of people on any other day. It's going to be no exception this week, with the world, quite frankly, watching how South Africa is going to decide from today, tomorrow, and of course, after Wednesday. And that's why we thought we should bring into our world-class studio here at The Rock, as they say, Mzwandile Mbeje, who, as you mentioned, is our political editor at the SABC. Have you had a moment to catch your breath yet? What a time.
I wish I could, but listen, if we could take it this far, I mean, 7 days, is it 5 days?
Yeah.
There's nothing to wait, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the preparation, though. I think a lot of people, of course, have come to expect a certain standard from the SABC, not only insofar as the nature of our coverage, but what we choose to focus on during this election.
Well, this is, when all is said and done, I under South Africans. So we needed to then take this thing out there to South Africans. And how is that taken to South Africans? Through their political parties. Remember, every 5 years, we decided as a country in a democratic system that every 5 years we'll give South Africans a chance to elect their new people who will govern them for the 5 years. So that term has expired.
Yeah.
And then ours has been to facilitate that process, take those parties and lay them out there to the public to see those who had been given the opportunity, did they do what was expected of them? If they did they do enough? So if they needed to correct a few things, so do you think they'll still be able to do that? That's what we do. That's what we did. And then, of course, there are those who want to wrestle power from them. So they also had their own saying to the public to say, we're here, we feel those may not have done enough. So our responsibility and as the public broadcaster was basically to facilitate that by taking parties out there, showing their manifestos, and then giving South Africans their own opportunity to say what is it that they want to see. And then when all that is said and done, it's the beginning today, as you've correctly said, that 1.6 million have already started casting their ballot today and tomorrow, and then of course on the 29th. So everyone who would not have done that. And oh, by the way, our compatriots that are outside started the show for us, and then they came out in their numbers. We saw those snaking queues in some of the embassies, which basically tells you that everyone feels they have a stake in this country. It's their country. They want to make the decision. The opportunity to make the decision is here. Let them make it now.
Yeah, and no matter how things go, history will be made this week. We know, of course, that South Africans have headed to the polls already, I think, 6 times. We're getting into the seventh administration now. Yeah. And each time has been a time worth observing, because despite the fact that we've got 30 years of this democracy, there's still so much ahead to learn about how this democracy actually functions and what ultimately characterizes it.
I mean, if a country like the United States, for example, which is close to 250 years of democracy, is still learning, we are only 30 years. So a lot more we still need to learn. And a lot more that we've actually learned as well, because as much as you continue to learn, So some of the lessons that you have learned, you ought to then implement them, because they will help you. And then along the way, you will have to change direction. And then, of course, this election for me has been so interesting. Like every other election, it will have its own dynamics. That's exactly what's happening now. Yeah. I mean, you and I, before we got into the set, we were speaking about that leaderboard, where we actually see the record number of parties contesting. And what does that tell us? Does it tell us that is this a maturing of democracy, or is it telling us that perhaps people are not happy with what is available, they would rather come with their own entity? But what I've been observing is that every election, the number has gone up, gone up, gone up. So I don't know what's going to be happening in 2029. Yeah. But then here is something very interesting again, and despite that the parties have been increasing in terms of contesting. In the National Assembly, they've either remained 13 or 14 since the dawn of democracy. So what does that tell you? South Africans are clear. We don't want a lot of parties in parliament, but will they change this time around?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the big question. And it's an interesting observation, right? So even though there are a whole lot more options on the table, typically South Africans are found to be conservative and stick to what they know, albeit a few changes.
Absolutely. And in this election, we even have added a new element of the independents.
Right.
So we have 11 independent candidates contesting for the very first time. After the Concord obviously ruled that we needed to amend the Act to be able to allow people to be able to stand. So from what you have said, that we are a conservative country, so will we be out there? Will we be able to give our confidence and votes to the independents? So this election really will tell us a lot more. There's a lot of lessons that we are taking, and I'm sure even those who are contesting, they are actually monitoring carefully. If you are an independent, you actually want to check how South Africans receive your message, because when you interact with South Africans, we are generally very nice people. Yeah. We'll be very nice to you, but on the crunch time, will we still be nice to you? So that is the lesson, Ayanda.
It's an opportunity for us to segue into turnout. You're absolutely right. Typically, South Africans are law-abiding. Generally speaking, we want to be seen to be partakers in any other process of our country, so to speak. Yeah. But when it comes to doing the work, the IEC has in the past said that, we are seeing what seems to be a steady decline in the people who typically would be eligible to vote and those who actually pitch up on voting day.
I don't know. Maybe it's something once people get used to a situation where voting is now like it's a norm. I mean, you take it for granted that it's elections. So should I not? I think that is what perhaps sometimes informs people in terms of their own thinking. But then you look at how contested the election becomes. So with this one, I just want to think we may match or perhaps slightly be above what we had in 2019. I know that the local government elections, so there it was actually very bad in terms of the turnout. I mean, we're about 45%, so that is not good news at all. But generally and traditionally, local government elections don't really get people out there. So it's the national elections that really get people out there. So compared to the international standards, I can tell you we are still up there because when you look at established democracies, yes, there are those that go out in their numbers, but generally established democracies, you'd find them at 40s, 50s, but then there would be those who would go as high as 70.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope we'll be counted among those,
absolutely,
given what's at stake in this particular election. Of course, there's a last-ditch attempt, some people might say, to garner votes in all kinds of ways. Several high-profile politicians are casting their votes today. We've had opportunities to speak to them. Many of them are still very confident about how things will supposedly go their way. Yesterday, we heard from the head of state, and I know you were there at the Union buildings, as he gave his last message, if you like, to the country before we go to the polls. Given what he said, was that to you a message from a head of state, or a message from a head of state who happens to also lead a certain political party and has a parting word to say before the 29th of May?
You know, and we had a discussion with the staff in the office of the president after that address, obviously talking about all things that he was speaking about. And then one of the things we're like, okay, it's nice to be a head of state because you carry certain privileges. I mean, you are an incumbent if you want to speak to the people that elected you, particularly because it's just before the vote, so you are allowed to do that.
Right.
And then what you say, it's really up to him. Remember, as South Africans, we elected him. Remember, once the vote is done, so we all obviously are bound by the outcome. So basically they were saying, no, he needed to respond and to report back to South Africans that after the past 5 years, he was basically accounting. But as we are here talking about that, somehow, I mean, everyone who has an opportunity to grab a chance to pitch the message in whatever way, I guess they would. Yes, he spoke as the head of state, but of course, as he was mentioning the achievements, somehow in the minds of the people, he would say, he was hoping that as I'm saying this, people will know that this is me who's been doing this. So when they decide to look at me outside of this hat I'm wearing, they will somehow link it to who I am, what I have done. So basically, that's what was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the Americans call it sins of incumbency.
Indeed.
Exactly. That's what he was doing, because he carries those certain privileges. And I guess all those parties, should they be able to get that vote on the 29th of May, I can tell you, similar thing will be happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess it's all love and fair in war, as some people might say. All right, we've made reference to the national ballot, the presentation that's not too far from where you are. And I must say, as you can see from some of the shots we're giving you, the SABC has the best seat in the building, not only from where we are stationed here in our world-class set, but certainly from the floor as well. And all the numbers there are still zeros, right? Hopefully that will begin to change. When can we start seeing any kind of movement on those ballots before we make sense, of course, of what it means?
You know, the excitement will start, yes, it's starting now, but not that excitement that we were expecting. But on Wednesday at 7 o'clock, when you see those snaking queues, when you see that excitement, when people go out there and vote, that will be the excitement. And then there will come the time where the votes will close. And then somehow the reality starts to now sink in, because you get excited, you do everything that you do, and then you come to the end. Because once those stations, even those, remember, station, even if it's 9 o'clock, or if it's 9 o'clock, the closing time, so you are allowed.
Yes.
You are allowed because you are already there.
Right.
So once all those have been done, and then the counting starts, so then the reality starts now to sink in. You look back, did what I do, was it sufficient to convince South Africans to vote for me? So now, from your voting stations, the focus moves here, that leaderboard. If the tradition is to be maintained, I expect at around 1 or even 3 a.m., some of those smaller voting stations to start posting. And that is basically the start. Obviously, the official votes or the official votes that will come out there don't necessarily tell the entire story. But basically, it's the start of that journey of having political leaders seated here, some very happy, some sad faces. So we'll be witnessing it all here, because now all of them think we love them as South Africans. And of course we do love them. But of course we will choose who we want to govern our lives. And then once South Africans have decided to do that, and then you realize that you are not the one who is chosen, so that reality sinks in. And that board starts now to shake. We are looking at the zeros now,
Yep.
and others would be up there, others middle, and that is what you call elections. And you start to hear those political parties looking at their traditional strongholds and perhaps hearing people saying, well, we haven't counted at this particular place, we're still coming. So that is what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
That is the reality of the next few days that we'll be witnessing. It's going to be a beautiful occasion, particularly for us as the media, our responsibility is just to put it out there to South Africans. Whatever happens, it doesn't concern us. It only concerns us because we are South Africans. But who wins, who loses, it's their baby. We will just take it out there to South Africans. It's your choice. 29 May is here.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, I'm glad I'm on this side of the line, because I cannot imagine the anxiety, all of that comes with essentially holding your breath until the results are declared credible and this election has been free and fair. The good news is that many of the people who are part of our broadcast have done this a number of times, including yourself as well. And that comes with hopefully a bit of reflection along the way, unique insights about, what may make this particular election stand out. And I wonder if any of that is crystallizing for you yet. It is still early stages.
Yeah.
We don't know how provinces are going to swing. But would you say there's any particular issue even perhaps that's characterized this particular election than the others that we've had so far?
Oh yes. I think I have 2 points to make on that. Almost every election there would be a party that will perform in a manner that will a wow to South Africans, because perhaps we may not have expected that particular party to perform in that way. So one or two parties perhaps to be the surprise performers. I know that perhaps people would be looking out for how MK is doing, and it makes sense because it's being led by someone who had just led the ANC, the governing party.
Right.
So a lot of interest is understandable. So everyone will be wanting to see if they will make that kind of impact. So, and obviously there are others, other parties, the new entrants, which will be looking out for whether their entry was really genuine or perhaps it was just excitement. And the other one, I think you spoke about, I just forget the second point where you were mentioning.
Yeah, it was essentially about any other issue that's stood out.
Yes, I'm sorry. Load shedding.
Right.
So remember, when they all launched their manifestos, one of the things they kept speaking about was load shedding. But I think we haven't had that for the past close to 2 months now.
Yeah.
So, and then because it's no longer there, it's not really being spoken about a lot more. So I don't know how much of an impact it will have in this election.
Right.
But yeah, quite interesting.
It is indeed, and we'll see how that all crystallizes. Mbeje, great to speak to you. I'm loath to say goodbye because you and I are going to be here for a long time over the next week or so. So I'll see you later. I'll leave it there for now. Mzwandile, of course, is the political editor here at the SABC.